Hey guys, welcome to the fourth weekly podcast for HashMP EU4. HashMP is a competitive Europa Universalis 4 group that plays with our own balance mod, with games running on Sundays and Wednesdays. Our most recent Sunday game just concluded its second session, and with me I have Sven, who is having a very successful game on Venice, and as well I have our reigning GM and superior overlord, Foffy, who will be doing a short Q&A session after the conclusion of the normal discussion format of the podcast on sort of mod changes and group maintenance and group administration. As a disclaimer, I won't be asking Sven to reveal any Diplo or any ongoing deals in the game. We wouldn't want to influence the ongoing game, especially since Sven is also playing in the Wednesday game. We may touch on that a little bit. But with that, let's get into the podcast. Alright, thank you guys for coming onto the podcast, first of all. Starting with Foffy, for the Sunday game, you are an observer, and for all our campaigns, you're an observer. Do you see any improvements to the game state between this Sunday game and the last Sunday game, or between this Sunday game and the Wednesday game that's ongoing?
I would say that I think I've seen a lot of improvements in this Sunday game just because we have a lot of returning players, which means that we're seeing a lot of play styles come back. We're seeing a lot of like changes in Diplo because there's people that played in the group before that have now come back and they're just not really used to the new players that are around. Also, they're not used to the changes to the mod because it's been about 7 or 8 months since a lot of these people have played.
For sure, we have players like Luxie and QD coming back, and NATO made
Tornado Watch.
Yeah.
And,
And
it was noticeable he was a bit rusty.
yeah, Sven, you're actually hosting our Sunday game as well as being a player, and you seem to be having quite the Venice run here. Walk us through how Sardinia, Piedmont, and Naples fell down the stairs.
I mean, I kind of just slipped a bit and fell with a knife and accidentally hit them. But no, I was gonna kill Naples with, all the time. We just needed to wait for Austria to, not be looking at us.
Yeah.
Because he didn't want to let us. So we killed him together. Then when Austria fought Poland once, I got an opportunity to kill Sardinia, and I had prepared it already by saying I needed to ally Austria-Hungary, so I had to drop him, so I didn't have a piece either.
And so it was brought up actually that the peace deal with the Ottomans that you took when you and Austria-Hungary went on them sort of freed you to do that kind of Diplo where you were able to drop Austria and go for the Italy formation.
I mean, I've been hearing rumors all game that he wanted me gassed, so I've been a bit scared of him. So
yeah,
I've been trying to find friends elsewhere.
Because I know a lot of players in that position would have just gone for the crossing at Edirne and Konstan, but instead you went with the more conservative and took Albania.
I wasn't the wall leader.
Yeah, I mean I remember Fish saying he would have given you basically whatever peace deal you wanted there.
I mean, we wanted to be nice as well.
You didn't want to fully kill the Ottomans here.
I mean, to be honest, if I don't control Ragusa, I can't pull that trade into Venice as hard either. I don't know, maybe it would have been good to kill Ottomans, just straight off there. I'll try to at least.
Fair enough. And Foffy, we're seeing a lot of new players come into the group actually in more recent games, and Ottomans, speaking of them, is one of them. Caramel has been having a pretty good game, but what's your general impression of the newer players that have been joining the group over the past couple games?
Well, we've seen a lot of variability in terms of kind of how players behave when they're new to the group. I've noticed that a lot of people, when confronted with an entirely new environment, new mod, new players, they tend to kind of have one of two approaches, right? One approach is that they try to assimilate, try to kind of figure everything out, ask questions.
I mean, we've seen Caramello do that kind of approach.
Right.
Yeah.
The other approach is to kind of come into the group and, well, as far as I can tell, have a somewhat reserved approach where you're mostly trying to assess the mod in the group to determine whether or not it's worth sticking around in. And I've noticed that kind of mindset tends to hurt. Just kind of, it kind of hurts the play style of the player, because what happens is you come in and you don't have an open mind, and you're kind of playing off of what you think people should do.
Right.
And it just doesn't work out very well, because you really just have to take it as it is. Like, okay, if you die, you have to think maybe I did something wrong, rather than maybe something's wrong with this group.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, Sven, you're yourself a recent new player to the group. How did sort of like the process of joining the games and like understanding how sort of the mod work go for you?
I mean, I've played vanilla EU for a long time and such, and then I found Hash's stream, and he was playing multiplayer, so I started playing with the mod to like spice things up, and I really wanted to like try getting into multiplayer. So I played a lot with the mod, and I watched a lot of the live streams, so I kind of knew how it was and how some of the players were. So I suppose that made it a lot easier for me.
Yeah,
But
I feel like a large portion of integrating into a multiplayer group is learning player behavior, because we've had several players in the Wednesday game that just recently wrapped up complain that, well, they didn't really know how a player would act because they were new to the group, and so then that sort of like influenced how they handled the Diplo with that player.
Yeah. I still have a bit of problem with that, because I haven't played with them firsthand, like and stuff.
Yeah, like people in the group have a tendency to say, oh, of course he did that, he's Rope, or of course he did that, he's Smeeve. And
or
like that
well,
kind of
I knew Nadu was like that, so
Nadu has a big personality, but Foffy, I guess you can comment on this since you observe the games a lot. You can see these like sort of trends with player behavior, right? And sort of saying, oh, that's a X player thing to do, seems to be a sort of almost a cop out for people describing player behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Like how do you see like the consistency between games of certain players and how that affects people's interactions with them?
I would say that people are generally unwilling to accept that it might be their actions influencing other people around them. It often turns out that people don't have like this, oh, I'm coming and I'm doing this exact thing no matter what, because that's who I am. A lot of the time it comes down to they're making this choice and it's influenced by these factors. Right. And if you're getting backstabbed by somebody, for example, you have to consider, like, why did that happen? Is it because the player will always do that in that situation, or is it because I did something? For example, making yourself look weak, or kind of opening yourself up. Like, you can't expect people to just sit there and do nothing. Like it's not black or white, you know.
For sure. And we can come back to the Sunday game, but I want to move on to the Wednesday time slot a little bit. So for the Wednesday time slot, we had an eventful couple sessions. We're going to talk about both of them, I guess, because we had two in between the filming of the last podcast. But for the Wednesday game, Sven, you're playing as Switzerland, and doesn't seem like your borders are changing very much. How is the gameplay going inside the HRE there?
For some reason, I got to decide the peace deals for some of the wars, which might have been a mistake. Because I don't know, it's the single player mindset. Like, oh, I want a super strong province and div it up. I don't know. I like to do that. But we should probably just off the bat gone for all the forts in France instead of what we did, and then just cut him to pieces, you know. But he just kept on conning so the Netherlands couldn't lose shit.
Yeah, definitely. And it looks like Netherlands even managed to swoop in and cut a lot of that off from you.
Yeah, I didn't have the admin to truce break into France, but he did, and like he just took it all.
Fair enough. And you've played in the HRE every time you've been in the group, right? You were Denmark.
Nah, I've been Morocco once, I think, super long time ago.
Oh, super long time ago. But in like
Yeah.
the recent games since you've come into the group, you played Denmark. You played Venice, of course, in the Sunday game we just talked about.
I played Venice once before as well.
Right, and Switzerland now. So,
Yeah.
what do you think about as sort of like a newer player, the HRE changes? Like, how do they structure minor gameplay within the HRE? What do you think of the reforms?
I think the mod makes the HRE a lot more interesting and like more viable for like player slots, you know, like Hesse and Switzerland or something, instead of just like Brandenburg, Austria eating it all. Like, I think that happened a lot before.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, but maybe it's like the things are a bit too strong, or it just you do it so fast it's like kind of fucks it.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I don't know.
All right.
Like,
And I mean, Sven, before we move into sort of like a Foffy Q&A, do you have any more comments on either of these games?
no.
All
Well,
right.
I'm lucky. I'm super lucky, I suppose. I don't know. I kind of
Yeah, you're enjoying surviving.
happened. Yeah.
I know it's been a
Stuff
long
in some game, at
philosophy
least.
of Foffy here that surviving is better than dying because it gives you a chance to play more sessions and do more Diplo. So
Yeah, well, you get more practice as well. Like you get more used to play like in Diplo, doing Diplo,
certainly,
Like-
certainly.
like how you speak to people. Like it's really interesting, like how much you speak outside of the game. Like you only play one session, 2 sessions a week now, but you have still so much like to do with the game, like speaking to people, Diplo and stuff. And it's really interesting to me.
For sure. And with that, I really thank you for coming onto the podcast, Sven. But we're gonna move into some more like Q&A stuff with Foffy. We have for the first time some viewer and player submitted questions. So
Are you gonna ask Gandalf's question?
No, we're not gonna ask Gandalf's question.
Yeah, okay.
But so starting with some of the more recent mod changes, Sebsov wanted to know what your general philosophy for mod changes is, Foffy, and what influences you to make certain changes over others at different points in time.
Well, so I kind of have a unique position, right, where I run the group and I run the mod and I run pretty much everything else as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the thing I have to keep in mind when making the mod is that I can't always go for perfect balance or for just kind of straight mechanical changes that I think make the game better in terms of a multiplayer setting. A lot of the times you have to take into account what other players will think about your changes. Like, for example, in the group, I have to just kind of manage expectations, I suppose, by not immediately making changes the second they're asked for. Because I have to let things play out a little bit, and I have to let people know that the mod won't just change, at the drop of a hat. We have to kind of give things some time, right?
Right, and you also have to see how changes have an impact on the game. Like, the HRE changes may have had, like, some needing for fine-tuning, like with the base tax changes that you recently introduced, but we couldn't introduce that immediately after introducing the HRE changes because we have to see a couple games of, like, actual data on it before you can just slap some more changes on it, right?
Yeah, kind of from a game development point of view, because that's really what this is think, for example, other games where changes come out and it's not, immediately apparent that there's anything wrong or there's anything that needs to be tuned because player mastery has to catch up. So when the HRE changes were new, we kind of had a lot of HREs fail to get off the ground, and we had a lot of false starts, and we had a lot of people not really understanding what was going on. But now, as the meta's kind of evolved and people started to figure things out, we're getting a lot of really, really quick reform progress. And we're seeing 4 reforms in one game, and we're seeing just players knowing exactly what they need to do at all times, perfectly managing their marches and all. So you can make changes after those things start to appear, but not necessarily before, because you never know exactly what needs to be changed until you see it happen.
Right, and then you're just shooting the players in the knee before they can even develop a meta.
Yeah, and I think crucially as well, current HRE, while being obviously a bit too strong in certain aspects in regards to base tax and how fast the reforms come out, is still overall a net good thing. We just need to tune it a little bit, obviously, which
Definitely.
those changes are kind of in the pipeline and working their way in.
All right. So then we have some questions from Joker. Starting with the first one. How do you deal with the colonial question of like how a colonizer is supposed to be properly played, and how do you deal with your colonial nation as an overlord, and what do you focus on at what times? So basically, like colonial nation management, colonial micro, etc., etc. Because you in the past have played a lot of colonial nations. You set up the current colonial nation balance.
So I think the biggest thing that people struggle with when it comes to playing a colonizer versus playing any other nation in the game, because colonizers are extremely complicated. They can be the strongest countries and they can be the weakest countries, you know, kind of in terms of how much investment you put in. Like if you're playing a land nation, for example, Prussia, you're going to have like a relatively stable power level. You're going to grow, it's kind of all going to all be up to you and your Diplo, right? When you're playing a colonizer though, you just can't. I just see people do this thing where they don't rely on their colonies enough and they just kind of try to play it like a land nation, and then they get themselves killed or they get outscaled, and that just shouldn't be happening on a colonizer, right?
Colonizers are like the ultimate scaling countries.
Yeah, exactly. So I think if I knew I was going to be on a colonizer, first thing I would do is I would try to figure out how I'm going to carve out the best deal for myself in the New World. For example, if you're playing Great Britain, you usually don't want to give up Cuba if you can avoid it, because Cuba is crucially kind of the major colonial region in New World. It's in the middle. It has the best navy. It's very hard to attack, and it's pretty easy to defend. Usually, whoever controls Cuba is kind of the aggressor. Also, the trade is really good because you have the Caribbean trade node.
Right. You
But
can funnel everything into it.
So that's my first plan, is kind of try to figure out exactly how I'm going to carve out the best empire and try to balance it. But ultimately, you want to control all of the New World. But even if you do, it's really possible for you to just stagnate because you're not playing properly. You absolutely need to delegate. You need to kind of assign roles to your colonies. You need to make sure they know exactly what's needed. You need to communicate effectively. I think a really big thing is treating them with respect, making them feel like they're kind of like part of your family, essentially. Like you have to really sugarcoat it. You can't just like say, oh, well, you have to do this. You're my colony. Like you're not going to inspire any kind of like loyalty or any kind of like forward thinking. Like people aren't going to want to help you, right? If you're treating your colonies like friends, essentially, like, yeah, do this for me, they're gonna want to help you. They're gonna like be proactive. They're gonna look around and say, what can I do to help my overlord?
Right.
A big thing also is you really need to kind of balance their concerns, because they all want their colony to be the strongest, right? Mm-hmm. But you need to kind of consider the overall balance of power, where you don't want any one colony to be weak, and you also have to pick a few that you're gonna kind of max out early. Typically, you want to focus on getting Cuba up, for example, or maybe 13 colonies, or maybe Brazil. But then you also have to kind of transition after a point. You want to leave some colonies up, like some colonizable land up, so that the colony can kind of take the slack there and then focus somewhere else. And you also want to, I think this is really crucial, get as many individual colonial nations up as possible, as fast as possible. Like you want to get 5 provinces in every region so you can get players on them quickly and kind of court people and say like, yeah, we're going to do, X or Y, and, I'm going to give you lots of subsidies. Like you kind of have to entice people onto your colonies, which is impossible if those colonies don't even exist in the first place. Yeah.
It's just getting those colonial nations in the first place enables you to start that scaling process.
Yeah, exactly. And you want to do it before the end of the session so that people can kind of get set up and know exactly what they need to do.
Right. Okay. And moving on to another Joker question. This is a direct quote. Why aren't more nations able to raid? And quote, why do you hate raiding so much? Since it's an interesting mechanic to counter AFKing on prospered provinces, it would make sense for a few nations to be able to raid, for example, the new Ormuz in the Persia slide.
So, I kind of approach raiding from a game design perspective, like I do pretty much everything in relation to the mod. There are a lot of problems with allowing more countries to raid, and there are also reasons why you should only let the Berbers raid as well. If you think about it, it's flavorful for them, and also you kind of have like the element of they've always been able to do it, right? So it's good to keep the Berbers able to raid. That's kind of why a lot of these issues don't apply to them. They also are uniquely situated where like they can raid a lot of really rich provinces really easily. So they have like a unique diplo situation and they're balanced around it. When you add the ability to raid to a new country, you have to consider like how are they going to make use of this? There's like a how do I put it? There's a kind of a certain amount of power, like a power budget you assign to each nation. So, say for example, like the power budget of Spain, right? They have such and such bonuses, like they get free colonists, they get Tercio and all that. So when you want to make a change to them, like, oh, I'm gonna buff like how often they get Iberian wedding, well, that has to kind of take the place of something else. You might have to tone something else down, or else the balance will go out of whack. So the power budget that rating takes up, you always have to put it in traditions, which means it's taking up one idea slot. And you have to balance around that. So rating is kind of like feast or famine. It's like, what's the term? It's like raising in vanilla for hordes. You either get a lot of benefit out of it or you get almost none. So if Hormuz is the kind of country where, you come on, you see, oh, I can raid. If you're not getting benefit out of that, it's just a wasted idea, right? Mm-hmm. So logically, you say, oh, well, I don't want to waste my idea slot, so I'm going to go focus on a raiding build, right? I'm going to go, and the only nearby place that's viable to raid would be India, the west coast and south coast of India. And if you're going to do that, that means you're going to focus all of your attention on that naturally, because everybody has their own kind of play style they gravitate towards. So you're going to see a lot of players go and try to raid, make that their sole focus, and then they're going to neglect everything else about the country. It's just not going to serve a real purpose to be there. It's just, I'm going to go raid someone, and that's pretty much it. And when anyone else comes knocking on the land, whether it's the winner in the Levant, like the Mamluks or the Ottomans, or the winner in Persia, you kind of have to submit or die at that point, because you just focused all of your attention on this raiding thing.
All right.
And it makes it really one note as well. So, I mean, even if it's not Hormuz, I can't think of any other country in the game where it's just a healthy thing to have.
For sure. Another topic that's sort of tangentially related, one of the viewer submitted questions was, what do you intend to do with the Persia rework? Why was it even initiated? What do we gain from adding an extra player slot?
So, when I look at region balance, I kind of consider, like, does everybody else have enough room to grow? Like, if I'm adding a new country, I really have to consider their neighbors first. I have to think, okay, so, for example, in Italy, we have 3 countries in Italy. We've got one in northwest Italy, one in northeast Italy, both centered around different trade nodes, and we got Naples in the middle, near the bottom. So they all kind of have room to grow. They all have their own expansion paths. If I were, for example, to slot Florence in the middle, where is their expansion? They have very limited avenues. They're going to come into conflict with somebody almost immediately. So, excuse me. So, essentially, I'm looking at Persia and I'm thinking, all right, so it's pretty settled. A lot of the time, Transoxiana loses out to Uzbek. Afghan either goes for the Persia play or goes into India. And then Kara, every single game goes into Persia. So there's not a whole lot of player agency there. There's just not very many interesting outcomes. And what tends to happen a lot is If the Kara player is weak, that means the Persia region is almost worthless for the entire game. So I'm thinking, all right, well, we need to do something about this, obviously. And my idea is we slot a player in central Persia, remove the Transoxiana slot because it's too close to Uzbek. We kind of give Uzbek some space. We give the new slot some space. We give them some more expansion options. Obviously, it's going to bring them into conflict with Kara because they're near the Caspian Sea, and Kara is probably going to want to go for Persia. This might actually change it up a bit where maybe you don't always go for Persia as Kara because it's just too much work trying to go into Khorasan, for example.
Right, like you're punching into these mountains and you're dying from behind too much.
Yeah, exactly. And you're just not going to scale. Like if you have conflict right from the start as Kara, you're never going to be able to compete with the Levant winner, being either Mamluks or Ottomans, obviously.
Do you know that encourages like a gank mentality with the Levant, where like a QQ picks sort of a king in the Mamluk Ottoman war?
It could, but the problem is like it kind of already does have that flavor, where Kara kind of goes into Persia, forms it, and then inevitably has to deal with the Levant winner. Like, the conflict is always going to be there because Basra is such a powerful trade node, and getting into Persia is really nice as well if you already have control of Aleppo. I think that we're basically giving options, right? You can go one way or you can go the other way. If you, for example, have like an Afghan player that's willing to work with you, maybe you can actually gank Khorasan and then get in and form Persia anyways. Or if you have a Hormuz player, maybe the Hormuz player decides they wanted to get into Basra and they go into QQ. Like, we've just got a lot more options now.
Yeah, bringing player variants in there.
Crucially, I think options is kind of the operative word here because it's clear that even when players have options, it doesn't mean they're going to make use of them. So we might see a kind of situation where everybody does one thing, but that's kind of the nature of having games that last for over a month and you don't get a whole lot of turnover, where, you know, you might say like, oh, this region's imbalanced because people have done the same thing 3 times in a row, but sometimes we'll see people do other things, you know?
Exactly. So then now we have a few shorter questions from Doge. So starting with the first one, Doge wants to ask, how do you have so much time to invest into all the different things you listed, managing the rosters, managing the mod, managing the group, managing the players, observing the games every single time?
Crucially, I would say it's not about having time, it's about having motivation and passion. Because I don't think that what I do actually takes that much time out of my day. The most time investment comes from actually observing the games. And it's kind of the same time investment as anyone else, right? Obviously, I have to do more where I'm working on the mod occasionally, but sometimes I'll do that while I'm doing other things. Like I'll be, you know, watching Netflix or something and then modding on my other monitor, or I'll be talking to somebody and I'll be modding, or there have been a few times where I've been in the game observing and also modding at the same time. I tend to avoid doing that because it makes the Twitch viewer experience a little bad, but yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when you get like up into the 60, 70 viewer range.
I have a lot of passion for this group and for EU4 multiplayer in general, just because it's so successful and everybody is so kind of committed to making it work that it just works. I don't know. Like, I know I do a good job, but I think everybody else does a really good job of making my life easier. Crucially, we don't have a whole lot of disputes anymore when it comes to GM actions. We don't have a whole lot of drama, you know, actual drama. We'll have like joking drama, but nothing really bad. Like, people aren't quitting actively. Like, it just works out pretty well, and people are really patient with the mod changes. Like, I know I don't always do the best job, but I do a pretty good job. And if I'm making a change, there's generally a pretty good reason for it. And people seem to be pretty accepting of that.
For sure, for sure. Doge also wants to know, sort of in the same vein, do you have any like big future plans for the mod or the group that you want to introduce?
In terms of future plans, I'm kind of looking at the next version of EU4 that's coming out soon. Well, in about probably 4 or 5 months from now.
I think they
there
said
might be
first quarter 2020 is
yeah.
when it's-
So at the very least about 5 months or so, and we're kind of I'm kind of looking at like there might be some really big changes that need to be made to kind of accommodate for Paradox's changes, and I'm looking at how we're gonna kind of make that work. Like, I tend to want to give Paradox a chance. I don't consider Paradox's changes sacrosanct. Like, I'm willing to go over them and kind of make the changes I feel are necessary for multiplayer, because I feel like a lot of the changes that Paradox makes are single player oriented and they don't necessarily take multiplayer into account. And with our mod, I only have to care about multiplayer, so I have a lot more leeway.
you don't have to balance between any different groups of players. It's literally one group of around 60 to 70 players in a single multiplayer environment.
Exactly. Which is why I feel like our mod will just always be better than vanilla for multiplayer no matter what. Because it's just not... there's a lot of single player bloat that's just gone, and I don't know. It's just better for multiplayer in general, but I have to consider, like, if I'm going to give their changes a chance, then do I port them over one for one and kind of just see how it goes for a game? I'm really reluctant to give up 6 months of a game to kind of give Paradox a chance, because if it goes bad, it can go really bad.
Right, you get some sort of runaway idea set or some unbalanced event or something that leads to a country getting an unfair advantage, and it can really disrupt the game state.
Yeah, exactly. And other than that, I don't really have anything else planned. This Persia rework, other than that, I think things are going pretty well.
I mean, I think we were planning something with like signups, but beyond maybe some like structure changes to like.
Oh yeah,
how...
I always have some things on the back burner. Like,
yeah,
I've noticed that people tend to give me a lot of suggestions, and it's like all I really do is sit here and think of ways to improve the group, right? So I think of a lot of these suggestions before I get them, and then kind of run through them in my head, and then kind of cross them off and move on, right?
Right.
Sometimes I go back to things though.
All right, Doge also wants to know if you could give a little explanation on like roster creation balance, because I know that's something that isn't always necessarily publicly discussed, but like if there were some aspects of it that you could shed some light on that you would feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, there's some things that I can't talk about when it comes to roster creation, because once you lift the veil, it changes player behavior and it changes player expectations pretty permanently. But I would say there's some things I've talked about in balance chat, for example, where I just think there's one pretty good methodology that I've built up over my time doing this, which has been about 9 months now, where you look at each player and you consider where is this player best utilized, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it really just comes down to, if you're doing things that I think make you suited for a certain country, I'm going to place you on that country at a higher priority. I want to make the best use of every individual player in the group, and I want to make the best game possible. Sometimes that means sacrificing what players want for the purpose of game health and game balance. Sometimes that means kind of being the bad guy and saying, like, if you're going to do things that are bad for game health, then I just can't put my faith in you, for example. I've noticed that people take less into account when they say, "Oh, this person should have been slotted here," for example. Like they'll give a reason for it, of course. You know, maybe one or two reasons they'll say, like, "Oh, this person should be here instead of there." But then I'm sitting here thinking, like, okay, you move one player, you have to consider what about everybody else. Every single swap you make when you're making a roster kind of has like a ripple effect on the rest of the game.
Right, like
because everybody has personal experiences, everybody has like different personalities that clash or don't clash, you know?
Right, like I've been privy to some rosters and seeing like what shifting like 2 major players around does to like a whole region swap is just like a huge headache for like a roster creation. It can like double creation time, and it can even make like certain players like not even slottable because you just can't move them to a different country.
Mm-hmm. There have been times where I literally have to message somebody and say, like, I can't get you in unless you pick something else. And I'm sure those people know that, like, when I'm coming to you for that reason, it's because I really can't get you in any other way. Because everybody picks 5 countries, and it's just mathematically impossible for some people to get slotted when they pick 5 countries that everybody else is also picking. Crucially, we had 22 signups for Sweden for the last game. It's just, it gets really difficult. There have been times where I will be sitting there and I'll be like, well, I kind of want to make this swap. And I have to go through, and it takes me like half an hour, and I have to swap 12 other people at the same time. I think my record was 13 for the biggest swap I had to do. And it completely changed the roster just because I wanted to move one player.
Definitely. And I guess in sort of the same topic, Dojo also wants to know, like, what's your approach to dealing with difficult players? I'm not gonna like name names on these kind of difficult players, but we all know the type of player that can be difficult in like roster slotting, can be difficult in game, can be difficult in like just rule management. What's your approach to handling difficult players?
So I kind of have a de-escalatory approach where I will literally tell people it's nothing personal. If I have to do something they don't like, or I have to be the bad guy, it's just, I don't like doing that. I don't dislike anyone in the group at all. I don't hold grudges against anyone in the group. It's just sometimes things have to happen a certain way, right? If you let people know that, like, you kind of understand where they're coming from and you treat them pretty well, and at the end of the day you're just, nice, a lot of things will work themselves out. If that doesn't work out, then you just kind of have to remind people, like, you're not the end all be all. You can't cater to one person exclusively. You can't change everything around to suit that one person. You can't. There's too many people for that to be possible. And that's also why I get really upset when people kind of disrespect the game, because you're not disrespecting just me or just the group or just the game. You're disrespecting 39 other players in the game. It's just, that's why I'm so quick to ban, because I like to take people just out of the equation entirely, because then they can never do anything against the group again. There's just too many people for any one person to be worth that much.
For sure. And I guess that's the conclusion of our viewer submitted questions, but I have a couple questions of my own. So in relation to streamlining some of the administrative tasks in the group, I'm sure a lot of people don't really understand like the depth of administrative work, maybe not the time invested, because it's not like a super time intensive thing to run any but there are administrative tasks to the group, and you have streamlined them over the past few months. What do you do to handle like sort of stubbornness surrounding like, oh, it's the group's tradition to do it this way, or we've always done it this way, why would we streamline it this way, or, well, like, don't we need other people's opinions on this kind of thing?
I mean, at the end of the day, I'm the one in charge, and if it's something that's going to be better for the group, I'm definitely not afraid to do it. I think sometimes I can kind of come across like, like, yeah, I'll listen to a lot of different opinions and take them into account, and that means that, yeah, I'll listen to other people all the time, but it really does just come down to, like, if I think something is better, I'm not afraid to do it, and I'm not afraid to just completely kind of discard what I see as unhelpful feedback, I suppose.
All right.
I definitely demand like a certain quality of I demand introspection, basically. I want people to think about, like, how is what I'm saying affecting the group? Like, am I actually thinking this is going to make things worse, or is it just something I don't like?
Fair enough. And my second question was, you're very open about treating certain regions of the map as sort of like either grounds for new players to play in, or grounds for players that wouldn't be suitable to play within like the more competitive environment of Europe and the Middle East. Like China or HRE or India are often slottings for newer players or players that are inexperienced with the mod. How does that sort of like conflict or mesh with your philosophy of sort of like perception of player slotting in the roster?
So I think crucially, there has to be some kind of transparency. Like, I have to tell people, for example, there are certain regions you'll just never be slotted in if you're a new player. And I think the biggest one is Western Europe, where you are very, very unlikely to get a country in Western Europe when you're brand new, unless I was able to think of a good way to utilize that kind of slotting. And even then, usually it'll just be Portugal. I can't think of any other country that a new player can kind of take over. And I just think that it helps with it kind of helps with people understanding that certain changes are made because we need to keep new players interested, we need to keep new players invested, we need to keep new players having some form of agency, right? Sure, the HRE might be a little bit stronger than it should be if it were all very good players playing, but the problem is that's just never going to be the case, and I can't just wake up one day and expect everybody to be like an Ottomans tier player. It's just never going to happen. It's kind of going against reality almost.
For sure.
Crucially, I try to avoid just throwing new players into random regions like that they didn't really want. I try to avoid just slotting new players in China and India because those countries don't tend to make you invest yourself into the game. Those regions are kind of anti-agency almost, where you can sit there the entire game and live just because nobody else really interacts with you.
So you're kind of trying to force that teaching of Diplo, teaching of the mod, teaching of...
Yeah, I'm trying to force people to engage, because I think when you engage, even if it's not necessarily something you want to do, you have more fun, you kind of learn more, and if it doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out, but I think it has a better turnover rate than just you're in India every game until you randomly get your European pick.
Yeah, I've seen that we've sort of like avoided slotting the truly new players in regions where they won't interact. But I mean, like, there's always going to be someone that gets slotted on Mali or someone that gets slotted on Congo. But
I try to make it so that anyone gets slotted in countries like that wants to play there.
Right.
Usually, if somebody signs up for Congo or somebody signs up for Mali or Songhai, for example, they're going to get it. Just because I don't want to throw a new player or somebody that doesn't want to play the country onto those countries, because it's, I won't say weak, but it definitely requires a different set of skills to succeed in that.
For sure. That's the end of like our Q&A segment. If you have any more like closing thoughts, Foffy, any topics you wanted to discuss that we didn't touch on?
I don't have any other topics to bring up, but I will say that I want to thank everybody in the group and everybody listening to this, because it's actually just, it doesn't work without everybody. It doesn't work without everybody showing up. It doesn't work without everybody kind of committing their time to making this work. It really is a pretty big commitment, not just from me, but from everybody else. Like, for people that play in both games, for example, you could spend up to 15-20 hours of your time on this per week doing Diplo and chatting, and I just want to hope we can continue to make it better going forward.
All right, thank you so much, and thank you, Sven. We'll be back next week with the next podcast, and see you guys next time.